Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vicini. We're powered by CLNS Radio. Today on the show, we are doing an NBA Draft Combine recap. I was in Chicago on Thursday and Friday to cover the event. Got a chance to meet up with some really great people throughout the basketball industry, all the way from NBA executives down to some really good friends in the media. One of those people is a typical guest on this show. It's Ricky O'Donnell from over at SB Nation. He's going to come in and provide some takes, man. How's it going, Ricky?
I'm good, Sam. What's up?
I have brought you on because I want you to down the hottest fire of takes on the NBA Draft Combine. I expect it, I demand it, and I know that you won't let me down, man.
Oh, no. That's way too much pressure, Sam.
Not for a take spurt like you are, I don't think.
I feel like my takes are mostly reserved to the Bulls.
That's true.
But, you know, I've got some thoughts on this draft class. I think in general it's going to be a super fun draft.
Yeah.
Just because of the combination of, like, this class has been hyped for a year, or if not more than that at this point. And then the teams waiting for them in the lottery are a lot of, like, premier franchises in big market cities. So, you know, just, like, the fact that these guys could end up in really intriguing situations makes this really fun heading into the lottery on Tuesday night.
Yeah, totally agree with you there. So let's kind of get into this thing. What was your overall impression of the NBA Draft Combine? Let's start event-wide right now, because I know that Paul Flannery over at your website kind of wrote something a little bit similar to what I wrote about over at Sporting News, and was kind of talking about, you know, what is this event? Like, what, you know, how does this thing work now in the information age? So what was your overall impression of the event?
Yeah, I guess, like, if you're a sports fan in general, it's natural to compare the NBA Draft Combine to the NFL Draft Combine. Uh-huh. And to me, it's really no comparison. I mean, I've never been to the NFL Draft Combine. But, I mean, as a younger person, I was really interested in the NFL Draft, too, before my focus was strictly basketball. But I feel like the NFL Draft Combine can, like, make or break a player, like, totally, depending on the athletic testing, how fast their 40 is, how much they bench press, whatever. Like, the NBA Draft Combine, to me, is, like, 5 or 10% as meaningful as the NFL Draft Combine, in the sense that, like, most of the top players just totally skip the event. Like Markelle Fultz and Lonzo Ball didn't even go through the athletic testing, so they didn't even get measured. They didn't go through the medical history. So it's just like pretty easy to, you know, just like skip the event when they're in their position. And obviously Kevin Durant had, you know, pretty critical comments of the combine in general in the days leading up to it. So to me, the most important thing of the combine, my guess is the stuff that we don't see. It's, you know, the one-on-one interviews. A lot of times I feel like NBA teams are sending out their road scouts to go to college games and to check these guys out in person. So a lot of, you know, actual GMs might not have seen these college players in person or really know who they are before an event like this. So really the value of the NBA Draft Combine to me is it just brings everyone to a central location. It gives teams some face-to-face meeting time with the top college prospects. And, you know, there is some separation, hopefully, for the guys who are on, like, you know, the fringe of the first round, either playing in the 5-on-5 in the athletic testing or the measurements.
Yeah, the way that I would kind of put it is that first, you're 100% right in terms of the NBA Draft Combine is nowhere near as important as the NFL Draft Combine. It's just not. Like, not only do the top players not show up, but so much of what the NBA Draft Combine is in terms of the public-facing portion of it is stuff that we've already seen in the past, right? So, like, we basically knew what De'Aaron Fox's measurements were, right, before we got here because of the awesome database that Draft Express keeps, and because, you know, at all of these, you know, events like Nike Basketball Academy, Adidas Nations, everything like that, they hand out, you know, little pagelets or leaflets with all of these measurements on them, so you know them already. Like, they do all of these things at these events like Team USA basketball camp and, you know, like I said, all of these summer events. So we already know what the measurements are. For the most part, we know how well these guys are going to test athletically. I don't think there were really any surprises there this season. The 5-on-5 portion is a joke. Like, let's just kind of call it what it is, right? Like, how selfish was the play in 5-on-5 this year, in your opinion, Ricky?
Yeah, the 5-on-5 I think is always sloppy because these teams are just like thrown together, right? Like basketball is at the heart of the game. It's like a game of rhythm, I feel like, and knowing the tendencies of your teammates and making everyone better. But when the teams are just thrown together like that, these guys are all obviously playing to raise their stock. So yeah, like you said, I mean, it's bound to be a selfish brand of basketball through no one's own fault, I feel like.
Right. So when you combine those factors being the public-facing portion of the combine, right, I'm just like, I don't know how much use it has in terms of evaluating players anymore. Like, in the information age, we have all of the information. There are so many more public events that we can go to now due to the proliferation of summer basketball, of AAU basketball. We know these kids so much better than, we used to know them. I think that in the 90s, maybe even the early 2000s, the combine actually did have a decent amount of value, but nowadays it's kind of hard for me to really ascribe a ton of use to it, I guess.
Yeah, I will say I always enjoy covering it. Maybe it's just because it's in my backyard in Chicago. You do get some, at least from the media's perspective. I mostly go there, fill up my tape recorder with interviews, and then have material to write about for the next month or so before the draft. So it's always good from that perspective. In terms of shaping the draft board, perhaps, I think you're right. It's mostly useless at this point. Like you said, we're not really getting a lot that we don't know.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. From a media perspective, it's really good, right? So, I'm sure that you're going to write some stuff. Yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead.
It would be better if the top guys actually showed up. I would have loved to talk to Lonzo or Josh Jackson or any of those guys.
Yeah, but even if they don't, it's still useful. I'll probably write something on Ojeleye this week. I'll write something on Terrance Ferguson at some point. I got a lot of really good stuff. It's just, the on-court stuff, it doesn't matter, man. It just doesn't. And I think that that's what everyone asks about, right? Did this person raise their stock? Did they hurt their stock based on what we saw at the combine? And the answer is often, maybe someone did as much as they could have, but ultimately they probably didn't really help themselves all that much, right? They really didn't tangibly change their draft stock. We knew Hamidou Diallo was going to measure something like 6'5" with a 6'10", 6'11" wingspan. We knew that he was going to jump 40 inches plus, and he basically did all that. And that was all he did at the combine in terms of the public facing portion. So I just don't know what to ascribe to it, I guess.
Yeah, I agree with you.
So with all of that in mind, what was your biggest takeaway of the combine?
I'll tell you my favorite moment of the combine. I don't know what my biggest takeaway was, but my favorite moment.
Yeah.
Sorry to change the question on you, but this is the one thing that's really sticking with me from the weekend. It was when we were talking to Hamidou Diallo about his 44.5-inch vertical leap, and one of the reporters asked him why that was meaningful to him, and he said, well, I was able to beat Andrew Wiggins, my childhood hero. Now, Andrew Wiggins is 22 years old, so the fact that he is Diallo's childhood hero, I just thought that was so funny, and it just shows how young these guys are and how quickly it goes from high school to the NBA. I mean, Diallo was probably a freshman, sophomore in high school when Wiggins was coming up at Kansas and as a recruit. So it's a young man's game, and the draft combine is the one thing that really hammers that home.
Yeah. Let's talk about Diallo real quick, because I think that he's kind of an interesting guy in general. Like you said, 44.5-inch vertical leap. That's just an insane number. What do you think of his situation, right? Because it's maybe the most unique that I can remember in terms of the NBA draft combine. Maybe you can say Thon Maker last year as well was similarly unique, but Diallo is a little bit different because he's not necessarily the highlight mixtape legend that Thon Maker was, where so many people already had so much of an interest in Maker. I feel like that doesn't really exist for Diallo, and that makes his position a little bit different and a little bit more precarious.
Yeah, I'm probably actually one of the few people that have actually seen Hamidou Diallo play, because
certainly at the combine.
Yeah, every year I go on a AAU trip, and Diallo was there last year playing on the EYBL for the New York Rens. I believe that was his team. It was coached by like Coach K's nephew, this guy Andy Borman, who's a really good guy. So, I mean, Diallo, I do think that the scouting report on him is really accurate. He's obviously an explosive athlete, as the athletic testing has now cemented. He's got great size for a two-guard. His combination of length and explosiveness is just, like, almost unparalleled, right? Like, that's, like, ideal. Those two things are ideal, what you want out of the position of NBA two-guard. Everything else is still developing, though. When I saw him, he was mostly a straight-line driver. He was taking the ball to the hoop. His handle wasn't really tight. His jump shot wasn't something that, he was going to rely on, certainly. He wasn't taking shots off the dribble. Maybe some catch and shoots he'll take, but even then he's a shaky shooter. I'd probably project him around about 30% probably without even looking at the EYBL stats, somewhere in that range. So, he has the physical attributes. You're probably just going to need to give him a year, 2 years to season in the D League. And I think whatever team takes him, they will select him knowing that, this kid is probably still 1-2 years away. And if you trust your own internal development, you could come away with a big steal if he ends up, developing the skill side of his game.
Yeah, like you said, this kid is a hyper elite athlete. I remember the first time I saw him, I think it was either 2014 or 2015. I think it was probably 2015. In the summer in Las Vegas is either an EYBL event or just like some specialty event where they got
Las Vegas 48. Yeah, they just bring everyone in.
Yeah, it was something. It was something like that. And the first time he jumped, my jaw was on the ground. Like watching him leap. It's not like Zach LaVine where it's, Zach's a very fluid, like he hangs in the air kind of jumper, right? Whereas like LeBron James is an explosive leaper who, is a power jumper. Diallo kind of combines those two, facets of leaping in a really interesting way that is incredible to see. Like the first time you see it, you're just like, holy shit, that guy is just not human. Like, I did not think Hamidou Diallo was human the first time I saw him.
Yeah, he's got absolutely crazy bounce. And, you just wonder, the way the game has been trending lately, like, how much is he going to be able to put that to good use? It's easy to get, like, carried away by something like an insane vertical jump, but, that certainly doesn't guarantee him success by any means in the NBA.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's just funny, though. Like, you, me, and Scott Phillips, our buddy from over at NBC Sports, we all, like, went out of the media room to go watch him do his vertical leap. And the first time that he jumped, he almost cleared the entire rack of, like, it was unbelievable.
They had to put it on risers. And I've only seen that for one other player. It might have happened for other guys, but I've only personally seen it for one other guy, and that's Aaron Gordon, who, of course, is, 6'8", 6'9"?
Yeah.
A lot bigger than Diallo is.
Yeah, like, they legit had to, like, I don't even know, like, how did they do that? Like, they just, like, lifted up the entire thing and just, like, measured, like, how far they lifted it up and put it on something? It wasn't even like they put it back inside of the, like the holder thing that they had. It was the weirdest thing, but then you see him leap and it's just like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. And you are 100% right on his skill set, though. He still has a long ways to go. But in a league where wing talent is so vastly needed, right? And with a player that, while he doesn't have a ton of skill, he gets the absolute most out of his athleticism because he plays so hard. Like, we'll talk about a guy next, Frank Jackson, who I don't really think gets the most out of his athleticism. But Diallo always does get the most out of his athleticism because his motor just runs so hot. He is able to leap off of 1 foot or two. What do you kind of think of where his stock sits? Because I think that he has a higher floor, I guess, to me, than what a lot of people think.
Yeah, it's funny. I was going to bounce that back at you, but I do these mock drafts for SB Nation every Monday. And one thing that you've written about and that has been discussed through the draft community at large, it's just like there's a lot of bigs in this draft during a time when like no one really wants bigs.
Yeah.
So someone like Justin Patton, I would say, is like a better prospect than Hamidou Diallo or Jarrett Allen or John Collins. But then at the same time, you have to like go down the list, like which of these teams really wants to invest their high first round pick in the center, especially a center as raw as maybe Patton or Allen. So to me, I think I wouldn't be surprised if Diallo goes like way higher than people are thinking. I have him at 10 to the Kings. Not thinking that he's the 10th best player in the draft, Diallo, but when you look at it, it's like if the Kings have 8 and 10, I haven't taken Dennis Smith at 8, so they're going to need to take a point guard with one of those two picks. And then with the second pick, I mean, they have already a lot invested in the front court with Scal, with Willie Cauley-Stein, with our boy Papagiannis. So, they just need a wing. It's like that's the obvious part on the roster. And a lot of teams are going to find themselves in that situation. I personally would not be shocked if Hamidou Diallo ends up a lottery pick, even though it seems crazy at the onset of this whole process.
Yeah, no, that is crazy to me, but not crazy in a way. So, what?
Crazy but conceivable.
Yeah. So let's kind of move into that next part, right? Like you kind of mentioned the big man situation. So I kind of want to give our listeners kind of a readout of the way this works. So there's kind of a consensus top 10, top 11, depending on what you think of Zach Collins. But we can say it's a consensus top 10. So there are 20 other selections beyond those 10 players in the NBA draft in the first round, at least. So among those 20 selections right now, I would say that 14 of them are bigs. So or at least in terms of the way that draft boards kind of look right now, including my own in a way. So we've got Jarrett Allen, Zach Collins, Justin Patton, John Collins, Ivan Rabb, TJ Leaf, Ike Onabogu, Bam Adebayo, Isaiah Hartenstein, Harry Giles, Tony Bradley, Tyler Lydon, Jonathan John, DJ Wilson. That's 14 out of those 20 spots right now have kind of look like bigs in terms of talent, at least, right? So like 14 of the 20 next most talented players, or at least, something in that range, are guys who a lot of NBA teams have first round grades on right now. So how do you kind of mix that with the fact that there's no way that 14 of these 20 picks are going to be bigs? Like, there's just no way, especially whenever you consider that teams like Utah have multiple picks, and I don't see Utah using 2 picks on big men. Portland has 3 picks in that range. I don't see Portland using 2 picks on big men. Brooklyn, I believe, has 2 picks in that range. Does Portland really use 2 picks on big men? There's just no conceivable way to me that all 14 of these guys end up in the first round. So I think that we're going to see guys like Hamidou Diallo and like the next guy that we'll talk about again, Frank Jackson, and guys like that who, even if I'm not the biggest fans of their game, it's just they're going to rise because there's just no way that all of these big men are going to go in the first round.
I totally agree, man, and it's to the benefit of guys like Diallo and Terrance Ferguson, who really passed the eye test in terms of tools. Like, those two dudes are the mystery men of this draft, there's no doubt. Terrance Ferguson, I honestly think he would probably be lower on draft boards if he would have played at Arizona. Like, he would have had to share the court with Alonzo Trier. He would have had to share the court with Raleigh Elkins and Kobe Simmons and Markkanen. And the fact that, like, there wasn't as much of an investigation on his game at the college level, I think puts him and Diallo as two guys where, like, you just look at their physical tools, you realize that you need, shooting guards and wings, and those guys are going to end up going really, really high.
Yeah, I was surprised. I talked to quite a few NBA personnel people throughout the week, and I was surprised to learn that Ferguson and Diallo's stocks were pretty similar, I guess. Like, most people kind of have Ferguson way ahead of Diallo, right? Like, I think that that's pretty fair to say. Right, Ricky?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what Draft Express has. It's hard for me to gauge, but... And,
I had Ferguson at, like, 13 or so going into the event. I was a little bit surprised to see that or to hear, I guess, that most people kind of think Ferguson and Diallo are similarly projects, mostly, right? Like Ferguson can shoot the ball, but doesn't quite have that same elite level athleticism and length that Diallo has. So yeah, I was surprised that a lot of NBA people that I talked to see Ferguson more as like, a 20s pick, or, even I talked to a couple that were like, he should not go in the first round, but like, I think that that's like, whatever. I think that Terrance Ferguson's going to be a first round pick. But I was surprised that it was more like 20s than, this guy could be a lottery pick too, I guess.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the advantage that Ferguson has is definitely his 3-point shot on Diallo, right? Ferguson set the record at the Nike Hoop Summit game a year ago. He hit 6 threes in that game. Mm-hmm. So he is a good shooter. I mean, I asked him if he thought he was more likely to win an NBA dunk contest or an NBA 3-point contest, and he said both, which is a pretty swagged out answer. I really enjoyed it hearing that.
His media session was fantastic.
It was really fun, yeah.
Like I think TJ Leafs was probably my favorite, but it was either Terrance or John Collins for the second or third spot. Like, it was unbelievably fun.
Yeah, I talked to TJ Leaf for a while. TJ Leaf, just to mention on this, he knew more about the NBA than any draft prospect I've ever talked to. Like, someone asked him about the Orlando Magic, and he was like, well, the Magic went to the NBA Finals in 2009. And I was like, what? Like, most of these guys, like, they don't know. They really don't know much about NBA franchises, I feel like. At least not with the depth of knowledge that TJ Leaf was showcasing during his media session at the Combine.
Yeah, I might try and get TJ on the Combine because he's out here, working out in LA, because he's really fun. And I think he'd be a really interesting guest.
Yeah, and then everyone was obviously asking him about Lonzo and LeVar and almost trying to trap him. It felt like
you're not going to trap him.
Totally kept his cool. He was like, I love LeVar. Lonzo's one of my best friends. I think LeVar's a great guy. I didn't talk to him too much. He just did it with a smile on his face, and he seemed, really at ease covering the, the media portion of it.
Yeah, no, I mean, TJ is a kid that, awesome level kid, goes to church, every week, super, super smart kid. And I think that he's someone that will help himself in team interviews. He's someone that will help himself whenever these teams, actually get to know him as a person. So, yeah, I wasn't surprised super hardcore that he was awesome. But going back to Ferguson, everyone was just asking him about Australia, and everyone was asking him about what he's going to wear to the draft and stuff like that. And his answers were just dripping with swag.
Yeah, for every question he was most definitely. Every time you asked him something he agreed with, which I enjoyed. He's really fun, and, it's going to be easy to get sucked in by his, his physical tools, too. I think he's another guy who I wouldn't be surprised if he goes in the lottery. He reminds me a lot, this has always been my comparison for him, of Terrence Ross.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Who I loved when he was in that draft. I remember he went in the same draft as McCollum, right? Ross went 8, McCollum went 12 or something. Is that correct?
Was Ross that draft, or was he the Dion Waiters draft?
Okay. Well, anyways, I remember thinking... Regardless. I remember thinking at the time, CJ McCollum can't guard Terrence Ross. Terrence Ross, this is why CJ McCollum isn't a good pick in the lottery, because he's going to be too small to guard big, athletic shooting guards like Terrence Ross. Well, obviously, that was a very bad opinion in hindsight. CJ McCollum's awesome. Terrence Ross, for whatever reason, it just hasn't clicked. Even though he had a 50-point NBA game, he's got the size, he's got the athleticism, he shoots it a little bit. There's just a missing component there, and I almost sort of think the same for T-Ferg. Not to be too critical of him, I like him as a prospect, but I just wonder is it all going to click? Similar to the way it sort of hasn't clicked yet for Terrence Ross.
Yeah, and Terrence Ross went 8th overall in the 2012 draft. Ross is an interesting one. I really like that comparison because Terrence has become a really good NBA player, right? He's averaged 10 points a game for 400 games in his career. He's a really good knockdown shooter. He has value in terms of just bringing shooting and athleticism to the floor. And that's why, I remember doing this podcast with Blake Murphy after that big Serge Ibaka Terrance Ross trade, and I was like, yeah, I think Orlando kind of fleeced them, because I think that the value of getting someone like Terrance Ross for a year of Serge Ibaka, whenever Serge Ibaka is not going back to Orlando, is awesome. Like, I think that they did a great job getting him, but that's a really good comparison for Terrance Ferguson, in that I think he's going to be more of a role player than he is going to be this potential star player.
But what I'm curious of is what's missing. Like, is it his ball handling ability? I think that's the easy one. A lot of young men. Or is it more of like a mental component? Like, I mean, certainly like just like thinking the game, you know, that's a challenge for a lot of young players. It's just like having the game slow down for them, right? And that's what is hard for people like me to project, like how someone sees the game, how fast the game moves for them. And that's something that can really make or break a player's career when they have physical tools the way that Terrance Ferguson does.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think it's even a little bit difficult for NBA personnel people to do it the same way, because that's why they meet with all these guys. That's why they have them in with team workouts. You know, they go through this entire process and they bring them in, and, you know, they have them read through, like, you know, watch tape with them and kind of read through some reads and stuff. And, you know, they throw a lot at them in like an hour and a half span just to see how they react to it. And I think that how you react to these things is so vitally important. That's why I'm really, really high on Semi Ojeleye, right? So I've talked to a lot of people on their staff, and they say that, like, they only had to tell him things once. And as soon as they told him that, like, this is what you have to do, this is how you have to react on defense, this is how you, you know, even learn how to ball fake on offense and then jump into the lane, 2 dribbles, stop and pop from the mid-range. He just did it. Like, he had no problems reading and reacting to what was happening around him. I think that is often the thing, though, that we know the least about with freshman basketball players, right? And guys who are one and dones. We are not 100% sure how they're going to react to adverse situations in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And just like grasping that part of it is so huge. I mean, if you want to talk about Ojeleye, we can do that too. My 2-second takeaway on Ojeleye is he's about the most jacked wing I think I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Like, he's like ridiculously strong. I think being a Bulls fan based in Chicago, like a lot of Jimmy Butler's success, I think, is because in part he's just so strong and he's just able to like get into the lane and finish when he gets there. And I'm not comparing Ojeleye to Butler in terms of their game, but in terms of their frame, I mean, he's even stronger than Butler is. It's apparent just from looking at him, and it's like it takes you, you know, it takes a minute to like even process it. Like, NBA wings are not supposed to look that strong. They're supposed to be tall and lanky, and he's just like super jacked.
Yeah, 6'7", 241 pounds, 5.5% body fat. I was talking to one NBA executive, and we were talking about, like, you know, is he going to be able to play the 4? Like, do we think he's going to be able to, like, you know, be a solid post defender? And we kind of got to talking about his standing reach, which I think is like 8'6", which is not like, it's not good, to be honest, at all, in terms of the way that you look for guys who can defend the 4. You really want it to be like in the 8'8", 8'9" range, even for small ball 4s. And the point that guy brought up to me was he can't even like raise his arms all the way above his head because his arms are so jacked. Like, his biceps and shoulders are so big that like he can't get full extension upward because like he just can't, like, due to the circumference of his arms.
Yeah, it's crazy. But, you know, certainly, like, you're not going to be able to back down Semi Ojeleye, right? Like, how many power? Like, he's got a low center of gravity, he's strong as hell. So, you know, that's part of it too. Like, if he like learns like rebounding technique and things like that, even though he is a little short, you got to think the strength component will come into play to be an advantage for him there.
Yeah, he also is super quick too. Like, he has great feet for a guy that size. I think he was in the top 3 in terms of lane agility, and that kind of translates in terms of what you see on tape, right? Like, he's really, really good at sitting down and sliding with point guards in the college game. At least I'm not 100% sure he's going to be able to do it in the NBA, but he was really, really good at sitting down, sliding with point guards defensively, then switching back onto big guys. He was capable of guarding guys like Taco Fall for UCF, who's 7'6" and just knocking them off the block immediately. He's a really, really fun, really, really interesting player to me.
Yeah, Ojeleye was fantastic. Anyone who covered or followed college basketball this year, him transferring over from Duke, just immediate star for SMU. It was fun to watch his transformation.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about Frank Jackson real quick. Frank Jackson, I think, was probably the highest profile player to decide that he's going to sign with an agent and forego his final years of college basketball during the NBA draft combine. What are your impressions of Frank Jackson? Because I guess I have takes for days. I have Ricky O'Donnell takes on Frank Jackson.
Yeah, I guess I kind of want to defer to you. I'm assuming that I like Jackson more than you do, but 6'3" guard, he hit almost 40% of his 3-pointers this year. I think he can shoot off the dribble. He's another guy. Like, the game just needs to slow down for him a little bit. He's almost so athletic that it's tough for him to harness it. But he's a point guard who could finish a lob on an alley-oop. There's not many point guards that are going to be able to do that.
Sure.
And he's also someone that can hit jumpers off the dribble. So I think those two combination of factors, it is similar in a sense, I guess, to Ferguson or to Diallo, just because you see the physical tools. But with Jackson, we didn't get a chance to see him play a ton for Duke. He was behind Matt Jones in their rotation. Matt Jones was a senior for Duke, who was a limited athlete, but a pretty good defender and a good shooter. And I think that, Frank Jackson probably just felt like he didn't get a chance to show out at Duke the way he thought he'd be able to. Luke Kennard became their breakout guy. Then you had Kennard, you had Grayson Allen, you had Jason Tatum, all who needed the ball and were basically primary scoring options by themselves. You got 3 of those caliber players at Duke. And then guys like, Emile Jefferson, who need touches too, and Matt Jones as well. So I didn't think Jackson got a huge opportunity at Duke. When he did play at the end of the year, Jason Tatum got all the attention for Duke's ACC tournament run and just how well Duke was playing entering the tournament. But man, Frank Jackson was great too. I think he averaged 15 a game over his last 8 games or something like that. He dropped 15 on North Carolina in the ACC tournament semifinals. I remember that was sort of a breakout game for him. He was good in both tournament games. I would totally draft Frank Jackson and just have him sort of groom a little bit for a year or two. In my mock draft I did today, I have him going to Utah at number 24 because I'm cute like that. You got to think Utah kid. Why not just take him? Who cares? So, yeah, I mean, I kind of like Frank Jackson, but the floor is yours because I know that we don't necessarily agree on this one.
Yeah, so over the final 8 games, Frank Jackson averaged 13.5 points, 3.3 rebounds, right? Pretty good overall. He was solid for Duke on a team that, like you said, didn't have a ton of ball to go around. So here's always been my thing with Frank Jackson, and this goes back to, again, 2015 when I first saw him play on the AAU circuit. He doesn't utilize his athleticism in the way that you would anticipate a guy with a 42-inch vertical leap and, good quickness scores to utilize. And I think that it's kind of a twofold thing, right? So first, he's not really all that shifty. Would you agree with that? He's more of a kind of a barrel in and go guy.
Totally. Yeah.
And then the second part is he's a 2-foot leaper, which guys who are 2-foot leapers kind of struggle in terms of getting. It takes a little bit longer for 2-foot leapers to gather off the ground and explode upward toward the basket. And that split second allows for defenders to kind of rotate over and cause more contested shots, right? In the run of general basketball play, it's really difficult whenever you're in half-court settings to leap off of 2 feet if you're on the ball constantly and if you're driving toward the rim. And he's not a great 1-foot leaper from what I've seen. So he doesn't necessarily get the most out of his athleticism, in my opinion. And I also don't think he's a point guard. I have not seen anything from him in terms of vision that makes me think that he's going to be able to kind of dictate an offense, right? There's a reason that Duke went to Grayson Allen to be their point guard, and there's a reason that they operated through Luke Kennard more in terms of just like even diming guys and trying to get everyone else involved in their offense, either from the high post or the wing. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that Frank doesn't really have point guard instincts, right? So you have this guy who can shoot the ball, and he's skilled certainly, and he has a lot of athletic upside, but he doesn't necessarily have the requisite shiftiness that I look for in terms of lead guards. And I wonder if, despite the athletic advantage that he's going to have on most guys, if he's going to have trouble getting separation, basically. And at 6'3" as a scoring guard, he's going to be going up against bigger guys constantly. And I think that's a real concern for me. Can he consistently get the separation that he needs to get his NBA game going?
Sure. So I think his ideal sort of role in the NBA is going to be as like a microwave scorer, similar to Lou Williams. Now, Lou Williams' advantage on Frank Jackson is that he's much shiftier. He's, he can go east-west, whereas it feels like Frank Jackson's mostly north-south, I guess to an NFL term.
That's a great way to put it, though.
Yeah, you talked about the 2-foot leaping, and that was something like when I got into this, covering college basketball, you start going to AAU stuff, you start talking to basketball people, basketball scouts. That is like one of the first things that all like basketball scouts notice that I think like a normal fan wouldn't notice. Like when I grew up loving to watch basketball, I never noticed if a guy's jumping off 1 foot or two. But from a scouting perspective, it actually is really important, and it's something that everyone always brings up when you're watching these kids play. So I think you hit the nail on the head there. I don't know. I just feel like Jackson, even though he doesn't have crazy I guess ball handling skills, like he can still get his shot off the dribble. We saw that at Duke. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be, a highly efficient shot, but he's someone who can still manufacture a shot, let's say late in a shot clock situation, get you a good look at the rim. I do think he's a good shooter, and, when he has time, he really is an explosive athlete. So, I guess it depends, like, what you expect out of Frank Jackson. Like, you see the 5-star ranking by him, but he wasn't always a 5-star. He was someone who sort of shot up late. Yep. He was committed to Utah, right? Or BYU, I think he was committed. It was either Utah
BYU,
or BYU. Yeah, and then he sort of blew up. He committed to Duke. So yeah, like I don't really see him as like an NBA star point guard by any means, but I think he can definitely carve out a place in the league as a microwave scorer. Now, to move that forward, that is sort of a hard role to get in the NBA because there's a lot of guys who could theoretically be in that role. Like, remember Joseph Young in Oregon, who was drafted by the Pacers. Like, you're competing with guys like that, or like Russ Smith even. Like, there's a bunch of dudes who theoretically could fill that role, and it's just sort of hard to get an opportunity, and when you do get an opportunity, you got to produce. So, yeah, I mean, there's probably going to be small margin for error for Frank Jackson.
So I guess I guess my concern is he better than Tyler Dorsey?
He's definitely way more athletic. I mean, Dorsey's pretty slow, but Dorsey shoots the hell out of it.
Dorsey shoots the hell out of it, and he's shiftier. And he's bigger. He's like an inch taller, I believe, as well. I don't know. Like, I'm unconvinced that he is a lot better than Tyler Dorsey. I have Jackson a little bit higher on my board because I like the athletic upside a little bit more. But I don't know that he's like way, way better. And I think that kind of shows in the amount of, or at least in terms of the margin for error, right? There are so many of these guys that you can kind of count as, these microwave scorers. Like Andrew Jones is a guy that kind of will profile as that kind of player. Kobe Simmons will kind of profile as that player. Even Frank Mason, to an extent, he's smaller. He has a little bit more point guard skill, but his game is ultimately going to be his ability to knock down shots off the basketball or off the dribble and play off of that skill, right? So I don't know. It's hard. It's hard for me to get excited about those guys, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, small margin for error, and I mean, it is a good role for a team. Like, I think you look at a team like, the Rockets, when they added Lou Williams, it just seemed like such a no-brainer, like to just get another guy who created his own offense off the dribble. And then, when they play the Thunder in the first round of the playoffs, it's like the Thunder don't really have anyone else who could do that besides for Westbrook. Like someone like Lou Williams, even though he's not taking the most efficient shots, would be like a godsend for a lot of teams, I still think.
Yeah.
So I think the Dorsey comparison is interesting. Dorsey, to me, he sort of reminded me of just like slow Malik Monk, like sort of very similar, like mostly going to be a catch and shoot guy, but Monk's just like a way better athlete. You're right, though, and like this is why the draft is so much fun and why it's so challenging to evaluate for these teams because, who knows? You can see it playing out either way, right? Where like someone like Frank Jackson could end up being, a useful bench scorer or maybe never even get a shot, much of an opportunity in the league.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Was there anyone who surprised you at the Combine this year?
Yeah, how do I pronounce the big French center's name?
Jonathan Jeanne.
John. So he looked really good. I just assumed he was someone who would have like no shooting touch, but in the warm-up drills, he was shooting the ball pretty well. I was impressed with that, and he's just like so damn big. I mean, I remember talking to Rudy Gobert at the draft combine. That was the first year I covered it in 2013, and like Rudy Gobert had to bend at the waist while I like lifted my arm all the way up in my recorder to interview him. It was just comical how huge he was compared to me. And Jonathan John reminded me of him physically, both from France, obviously, is the obvious comparison, but just like so huge and so long on the court. And I was impressed with his skill level.
Yeah. First and foremost, I'm so excited by the fact that there's a guy named John entering the NBA. I talked to him a little bit afterward. He said that, he's planning to stay in the NBA draft this year and that he wants to come over to America immediately, kind of a la Rudy Gobert. Like a lot of people thought Rudy Gobert was going to be a draft and stash. That ended up not being the case. John wants to come over immediately. We'll see if that ends up playing itself out. Really interesting player, yeah, because he's even way skinnier than Rudy was when Rudy came over, right? He's probably, I would say he's a little bit more athletic than Rudy was then, at least. Rudy, I don't want to say he was clumsy in a way, but he was still very clearly growing into his frame, right? And John, it looks like, is a little bit more comfortable with his frame already.
Yeah, he's a little more fluid athletically, I think.
Yeah, and I guess the thing is, though, like, this is where I really, really struggle with French big men, like, just in general. And, like, this is a blind spot for me, right? Like, overall, I would say I'm lower on project big men than most people are. And then particularly with, Rudy Gobert, who I thought he was not an NBA player when I saw him. Like, he was really bad at the Combine. His French tape was not all that exciting. But Rudy just worked his ass off and got into incredible shape. He is now a really, really good athlete at a player that has a 9.7.5 standing reach. And I don't know that it's possible to really project that upon Jonathan Jeanne, right? Like, can we really anticipate that he's going to fill out his body in the way that Rudy has? Rudy also has like a 2-inch advantage in terms of standing reach. Probably has 55 pounds on Jeanne right now.
Wow.
It's because we think Rudy's probably 260, right? Something like that, 250, 260.
Yeah.
In that range. Jeanne measured in at 207 at the Combine this week. That's a lot of weight to put on. It's a lot of athleticism to add. He is such a project. I think it's going to be a couple of years at least, maybe 3 or 4 years before we see, what he's truly capable of on a basketball floor.
So then, if Gobert is in the comparison, maybe the other end of the spectrum is Ajinka, who is another French big man, who's also 7'2", he hasn't had a great career, but he's in the league, right? Like, he's been in the league since 2008. He was the 20th pick in 2008. I think that's probably where Jonathan can see himself drafted.
I think he's like a 20s to 30s guy. I would be surprised if he dropped out of the top 40.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. Like, Ajinka was picked 20th, so like that's sort of his range, I guess, right? And then the other thing is Ajinka's an 80% free throw shooter, so like the ball looking good coming out of Jonathan's hands. It still makes a little sense, I think. So yeah, it's just like you just see that size and the fact that with so many of these young centers, they just don't have the size that he does. So I don't know. It's like you wonder what he could do for an NBA team. He definitely impressed me at the Combine, because I had never seen him play before. I had just known that he had crazy measurements, and I would say he was better than I was expecting him to be.
So, and this will come back to an interesting question. Like, here's another big guy who can shoot, right? So, Thomas Bryant. Would you rather have Thomas Bryant or Jeanne?
Yeah, I take Jeanne. Thomas Bryant's too slow laterally. Here's my Thomas Bryant observation. I have a buddy who loves the NBA, but doesn't know anything about college basketball. And he came over one time while I was watching Indiana play Michigan State. This was sometime during the season, probably in February. And he's like, are there any NBA prospects on the floor? And I said, oh, this kid, 31 on Indiana, Thomas Bryant, he's a sophomore. He was a 5-star recruit, came back for his sophomore year. And he could be. He's got really long arms, got a nice jumper. And my buddy watched him for like 3 possessions and said, oh, he's too slow, side to side. It's like, he's not even like he doesn't fashion himself as a scout at all. He's just someone who knows basketball or likes basketball. Yeah. And he immediately diagnosed what was wrong with Thomas Bryant. Like, an NBA big man just needs to be quicker side to side. And I feel like Bryant's lack of lateral quickness, to me, is the reason why I would take Jeanne over him.
Yeah, I think that I agree with you in terms of that. Like, I think that I would rather have Jeanne. It's just funny, though, because Thomas Bryant, probably a little bit better of a shooter at this stage than Jeanne.
Yeah.
Has basically the same measurements. He's not quite as tall, but has, just as long of arms, has a 1 inch shorter standing reach. Just defensive awareness and quickness, I think, are Bryant's problems. But he has a crazy motor. I think he's going to be able to play offensively and get offensive rebounds and, maybe knock down shots and attack some closeouts from out-of-control bigs that are attempting to guard him on the perimeter. So I'm interested in Thomas Bryant the more and more that, I watch him. As a second-round pick, I'm interested in him. Not as a first-round pick, though. Jordan Bell, I think, was the other guy that really impressed me this week. 8'8" standing reach, which is a little bit scary for a guy that's going to have to play the 4 and the 5, but everything else was perfect, right? Like, everything else, he was just dominant. He was, one of the quickest players in history in terms of his, I believe, shuttle run. He had an awesome lane agility score. He had like a 38-inch vertical leap. And then in the 5-on-5, he defended everyone. Like, he defended 1s, he defended 5s, blocked like 6 shots in the 2 games. He was awesome. Like, he was everything that Jordan Bell was supposed to be at the Combine.
Yeah, he was phenomenal. And, to me, I also like to think college basketball matters a little bit. So I immediately go back to his game in the Elite Eight against Kansas when he was just by far the best player on the floor. I mean, he was maybe the best player in the NCAA tournament at that point, through the regionals. He was just so dominant defensively. I want to say he had like 7 blocks against Kansas in that game. So quick side to side, so strong inside. He's going to clean the glass on both ends. And then, of course, we all know how the season ended. He misses box outs on consecutive possessions against North Carolina in the Final Four game. We were both covering the Final Four then, and he was bawling in the locker room. People would say they'd never seen a player take a loss that hard. So I think it shows, like how much he cares. That he probably is like, the type of guy you want to go to war with in a sense. So there's a lot to like about him. He is a little small. The game has been trending smaller and smaller. So, we'll see. He's definitely an interesting player. He sort of reminds me a bit of Jordan Mickey in a sense. So he's going to be picked probably around the same spot Mickey was picked. He's quicker than Mickey. He doesn't have the shooting range that Mickey has, but they're like kind of the same size in a sense. And they were both, just like dominant defensive college players.
Yeah, I even think Jordan Bell's just more athletic and more capable on the perimeter than Mickey is defensively. The key is going to be offense. How does Jordan Bell provide any sort of offense in the NBA? I'm still very curious on that. Like, maybe he is like a short corner diver, and maybe he can develop like a short corner 12-footer, and that's kind of how he helps space the floor away from the rim a little bit. But if the offense ever gets figured out, he is an NBA player, like, for sure. Like, not even a question. He is probably right now one of the 50 best defensive basketball players in the world. Like, would you think that that's a crazy statement?
That's a great take. I like that one.
Like, he is a really, really good defensive basketball player.
Yeah. I mean, with that strength and quickness combination, there's a lot to like.
Yeah, like he was the best defensive player in college basketball this season, I thought, unquestionably. And I like, if he went in the first round, would it surprise you? We kind of talked about that big glut of big men, right? Like the 14 guys for 20 spots in the first round. I didn't even put his name in there. But I don't think it would surprise me if a team went, oh yeah, we know what Jordan Bell's skill set is in the NBA. We have no idea what Tony Bradley can do in the NBA. Let's take Jordan Bell over him and just let him loose on defense. Like, would that surprise you?
No, because here's the thing: the NBA is so much high ball screen pick and roll that the number one thing you're going to want out of a center is someone who would hedge a ball screen or slide his feet with a guard. And of all the big men in this draft, I have more faith in Jordan Bell to do that than anyone.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe Jonathan Isaac, but Jordan Bell is a better defender than Jonathan Isaac, certainly.
Jonathan Isaac's going to play the 4 going forward, be a front court guy, because that's just the way the game's going. But he probably sees himself as a 3 in a sense, whereas Bell sees himself as a 5. So, if that's the type of level we're putting Jordan Bell at, pretty interesting.
Yeah, it is. My surprise at the Combine was I was surprised Justin Patton didn't test as well as, basically any other center that was not named Tony Bradley. And EK as well. EK was not a crazy tester either. I expected EK to put up really, really good vertical leap numbers and relatively solid quickness numbers. Didn't really happen. Justin Patton's body isn't all that great. That's maybe the biggest concern I hear from NBA teams right now is his body going to be good enough, to continue to develop long term and get to where it needs to be in the NBA. But when you watched him play, he played with a little bit more athleticism than I thought he showed during the testing skills. Do you think that's fair?
Patton we're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Patton is really fast. It's weird because I don't consider him a great athlete, but he really moseys up and down the floor and can finish when he gets there, and he's pretty graceful just running the floor, I think. So I'm not super high on Patton, to be honest, as an NBA prospect, just because, I don't see him as an elite rim protector. I don't think he's going to be one of those guys like Nerlens Noel. It's going to be an elite rim protector and someone who you could throw lobs to out of the pick and roll on offense. He's not going to be a post-up guy. He's sort of going to be someone who gets garbage buckets, I think.
I think he's
in the
Whiteside-y.
Whiteside's an elite shot blocker, though. Do
Yeah,
you think he's going to be that shot blocker?
No, I don't. I think in terms of his offensive skill set, though, I think he's Hassan Whiteside-y.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, but, Whiteside, he probably has a bigger catch radius around the rim, I guess. I do like that comparison to Whiteside's offense, but Whiteside's offense isn't really what makes him valuable. That's a far number 2 in his skill set to his defense, which is what really sets him apart. Yeah,
no, that's a great point. And I had Justin Patton in my top 15, and that was just a mistake. In my last board, I was sitting there, I was can I really who can I put above him? Who can I put below him? What am I doing? And I just tossed him at 15 or whatever. And yeah, on the next one, he's just going to be lower because I think I'm still evaluating, and I think I was just bad. That was a bad evaluation, I guess is the way to put it.
So much of this is going to be dictated by situation. And in my mock draft today, I have Patton going 19 to the Hawks, which I feel would be really good for a number of reasons. The Hawks took 2 wings last year in Taurean Prince and DeAndre Bembry. Mm-hmm. They have a young point guard they appear to be committed to in Schroeder. So it's they got Dwight Howard in the front court. They could use, another big man. They're sort of in a prime position here to draft and develop a big man, especially because they could get a guy who should be drafted maybe 11, 12, 13 a couple years ago, who's now sliding out of the lottery because people aren't valuing centers as much.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. What would you say who is your favorite center of that group?
My favorite center between Patton, Jared Allen. Is Zach Collins in this group? Because I would take him.
Let's say Collins is a little bit above this group because I think that Collins is probably a little bit better.
All right, give me Ike.
Okay. Why do you like EK?
First of all, he's a tank with like helicopter arms. Like he's super strong and super long. Every single person sort of agrees on the Capella comparison for him. It's almost kind of weird with how that's just become the consensus for his NBA comp. But Capella's a good player. I think Capella might be a little quicker than Anunoby. That's the one thing I would worry about. But to me, Anunoby is still a guy who, like, he has a role in the NBA as a shot blocker and as a dude who's going to dive on the pick and roll and who can finish above the rim. Like, he just has a very clearly defined role, whereas, like, I'm not really sure how Patton's going to get his buckets in the NBA. I'm not sure if he's going to be like a really good rim protector in the NBA. I feel like Anunoby, there's like less flash to his game, but he just fits into like a traditional archetype that you see in the NBA more so than a lot of these other guys.
Yeah, so EK's measurements this week were outrageous. 6'9", 7'5" height, 9'25" standing reach. 7 foot 6.25 wingspan, 252 pounds, 5.4% body fat. That is ridiculous. Like that dude, like you said, is just a total tank. I worry about the fact that I don't think he has like any sort of game. Like he can't put the ball on the ground. He can't finish outside of 4 feet. Probably realistically, the Capella comparison definitely is the right one, right? Like that's what you're hoping to get out of him. I don't know. I've never been huge on Clint either, so I guess that makes sense.
Sure.
But
so who do you like out of that group?
I think that Jarrett Allen probably has the most upside of that group. You know, he's 7'5" wingspan, 9'2" standing reach. Has just general game. Like he has really soft hands. He could potentially be able to step out and hit 16-footers. You know, just in general, his fluidity in terms of movement, I think, is better than EK's. Like he's able to kind of slide his feet. I think one more slide. He's a little bit better in the open floor than I see from EK. I think that he's probably my favorite of that group, but again, like I have these guys in my first round because I get told to have them in my first round by NBA people, and because like some of them will be good. Like there's just no doubt that some of these guys will be good. But I'm not like in love with any of them. Are you?
No, not really. And I think, situation's going to determine so much of it. And that's the hard part to project from our perspective because, if some of these guys end up in bad situations, you wonder how long they're going to be able to stick around the league. But if you end up in a good situation, I think Atlanta would be a really good situation, being groomed behind Dwight Howard for be it Jarrett Allen or Patton or any of these guys. So yeah, that's to me what makes it so difficult to project.
That's a great point. Situational fit is going to be vitally important for all of these big men because they're all flawed. Like all of them have potentially fatal flaws to their NBA career. It's going to be dependent upon how the teams kind of mesh around those flaws, right? Like how they work around those problems and accentuate their strengths in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
All right, Ricky, do you have anything else you want to talk about with the Combine? Because we've gone on for an hour here. I think we can call it here unless you have some fire takes to give us.
No, I think, we pretty much hit the nail on the head in terms of the Combine. It's not some like great big revelation that I think some people wish it would be. It's really just a big networking event. I think it's useful, for some reasons that maybe, the media and the public don't see in terms of the private meetings and some of the medical testings. But in general, it was still great to, get to see all these prospects face to face, be able to talk to them a little bit. See some fringe guys like, Frank Mason, Kyle Kuzma go through the 5-on-5 and, you can still tell like how competitive guys are from that, stuff like that. So, in general, it was a good event. It is what it is, I guess, as long as you're not expecting too much of it. It's still fun to cover every year. I enjoyed it, and I'm just really looking forward to this draft in general. I think this draft has more intrigue, than a lot of the drafts we've seen in recent years.
Yeah, I think that Semi Ojeleye from SMU, who we've talked about before on this show, he kind of put it best, right? Whenever I asked him about just generally what his feeling is on playing in the 5-on-5 and everything, he said that, everyone here is at the Combine because of how talented they are and how skilled they are. And what NBA teams want to see most, in his opinion, was that he wants to see, or NBA teams want to see how guys like him and guys like PJ Dozier and Wes Iwundu and, Svi, how they react to being put in situations that aren't always typical of them, right? Like they want to see how these players react to being put in problematic situations where things aren't always going their way. That's why they throw off the wall questions at them in team interviews. It's a benefit maybe of the 5-on-5 portion, which doesn't look all that aesthetically pleasing. He believes that genuinely everyone is super close in talent and that, it's all dependent on the way that you maturely react to what's happening around you. And to be honest, I think that I fully agree with that. Like, I think that was a very astute observation in terms of there are so many guys around the world and in college basketball and everything that have a ton of basketball talent. It's all just dependent on buying into a role. It's dependent on, being mature and just reacting and reading things around you that are happening and, having the correct reaction to it.
Yeah, but then don't forget that a team once passed on Kawhi Leonard, in part because he sweat through his suit in a draft day interview. So that's just part of what makes this whole process really fun and sort of mysterious because, maybe you would get a negative impression of Kawhi Leonard if he was so nervous that he couldn't even answer questions in a one-on-one interview. But, I think Kawhi Leonard's done okay for himself. So it's just all part of the mystery of the draft, and that's why it's such a fun event.
That is the weirdest story I think I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah, especially given what we know about Kawhi, you would think he would just be, programmed to answer these questions calmly and seriously, but you never know how these kids are going to respond to it.
Like, part of me thinks that, like, that's just not true. Like, that story, you know what I mean? It's just so ridiculous. Like, I think that it probably played a role, but I think that like maybe the team executive that told whoever wrote that story, maybe they were thinking like, okay, we were really just looking for reasons not to take Kawhi, because we thought there were too many flaws in his game, and that was one of the reasons.
Just so ridiculous.
It's an outrageous story. All right, Ricky, tell people where they can find your work. Tell them what you got coming this weekend or this week, and tell them about your podcast with Scott Phillips.
Yeah, so I guess you can find all my work on SBNation.com, either the college basketball page or the NBA page. I've been doing mock drafts every Monday. I'm still going to do mock drafts every Monday, so you can check those out. I always try to have fun with it. I always put, a lot of effort into those, despite the fact that, not too much changes from week to week, but, they're 2,000 words long. So if you want to read something about your team, a little blurb on each guy, I've got that covered for you, and then I'll be covering the draft throughout this whole process. So tomorrow night's lottery should be really fun. I guess the last thing I'll plug, my buddy Scott and I at NBC do a podcast that we're just starting to get off the ground. So we're going to record an episode today, hopefully, and we'll see. Hopefully we'll get that out tomorrow. So, yeah, just SBNation.com for all of my coverage and our draft coverage in general.
We have Ricky on the show regularly because he's great. Scott Phillips is going to be on the show in the future here. We've had him on the show in the past to discuss recruiting. I'm sure that Scott will be on at the end of the month here whenever we talk about some of the EYBL events that come out to Los Angeles here. So, yeah, you should go follow their podcast. It's great. Keep it locked here at the Game Theory podcast, though. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe to the show. It really helps us move up in terms of ratings and get the word out about the podcast, and that's ultimately the goal here. We'll be back on Tuesday night with some lottery breakdown. We'll see who ends up getting the number 1 overall pick on Tuesday night. And until then, we will talk soon. Bye.